Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, and this is a special, exciting episode. So I'm here with Alex Calleros, filmmaker and editor, Lessons from the Screenplay.
Hello.
And I'm also joined by two of my very favorite YouTube creators. So I'm joined by AltShiftX, who makes a ton of videos about a lot of things, but the main thrusts are Game of Thrones related videos. He does recaps, or I guess he did recaps of all the episodes, season 6 on or so, and then has these deep dives into fan theories that let you learn a lot more about the books if you're just a show watcher like myself, and it's basically required viewing for me when watching Game of Thrones. So AltShiftX is here.
G'day. Thanks for having me.
And we're also joined by Sage from Just Right. Sage, I feel like your channel is almost like the closest thing to like a sister channel for Lessons from the Screenplay. It's all about writing and analyzing film, but you also talk about books and lots of different mediums, and just have a lot of really, really interesting analyses of the writing of all these things, and I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I feel like you guys go deeper into one area, and I go wider into a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah,
so
I feel like they complement each other nicely.
It's fun that we can both exist on the platform.
Yes, and so all three of us have made videos about Game of Thrones, some more than others, AltShiftX. But Sage, one of your videos is called Falling Out of Love with Game of Thrones. So I thought maybe we'd start, since there's so much baggage around Game of Thrones. It's finished, everyone had their reactions that were what they were, and I don't want this to just be piling on and, an hour of complaining about the show. I want to talk about what it means to be a fan of the show and kind of what we're going to take away as lessons from, watching this crazy experiment that was Game of Thrones come to an end and all this stuff. But to begin, I thought we could start with what was the moment that made us fall in love with Game of Thrones? So Sage, do you want to talk about that moment, if you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just really early on, I think the pilot is just phenomenal. The first season, Ned's death. I definitely was a show watcher first, and then got into the books later. I just did a full read of all of the books this year. I was like, oh, this will give me more insight when I do my Game of Thrones video. It didn't really, but it's still well worth the 300 hours I spent reading it. So I don't know if that's the right number, but yeah.
Sounds right. AltShiftX, what about you?
I think part of how I fell in love with the Game of Thrones books and the show was not from the books and show itself, but when I went on the Game of Thrones wikis and I went on the Game of Thrones Reddits, and I'm like, oh my God, this isn't just a story. This is this incredibly complex, mystery and history and world that has all of these ongoing, themes and questions that get resolved in all these different ways. And you can put clues together and you can write family trees and there are people who have, and you can read all their essays. And I think it's the fandom that I fell in love with as much as the stories themselves. And part of the point of AltShiftX was, we started out focusing on the theories, and those were the ideas generated by the fandom engaging with the text. And that's what makes it special to me, I think.
What's fun about that is that everyone complains about the books not being done, but them not being done allows for ambiguity about what's going to happen, thus birthing all of these theories and all of that.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's given us so much time and so much space to pick every little mystery apart. And there are thousands of words of essays and there are relationships and podcasts that all exist in these gaps between the books. So George has kind of given us a gift by, having the books come out so slow, or maybe that's just Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of insane, the amount of theories and things that are out there. And I also find that fascinating, but I do not have the patience to go through that all. So
and that's why AltShiftX exists.
Exactly.
The purpose of AltShiftX is to communicate these ideas for the people who don't want to have to read theses on Reddit that run literally hundreds of pages long.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy, but thank you. Yeah, Alex, what about you? When did you fall in love with Game of Thrones?
I think it's probably the typical thing where, when Ned was killed, because I started watching Game of Thrones when I was working a part-time editing job, which was basically repositioning a camera remotely at a zoo in China to make sure it stayed focused on the pandas. That was my part-time editing job several years ago.
Yeah.
And I was just watching, I watched all of Breaking Bad while doing that, and I was behind on Game of Thrones, and I was like, I'm going to watch Game of Thrones finally. So a lot of season one was I probably didn't watch it as deeply as I should have, and it was in a window on my computer. But I remember that episode just, it stunned me like everybody else who hadn't read the books. And I was suddenly like, oh, this is a different kind of show. This show is breaking like what I thought was like a primary rule of like, you have Sean Bean as your main character, you can't kill him. So that was where I was drawn in and thought.
I thought the rule was the other way. Sean Bean
oh, right. Good point.
That is the kind of funny part about
that is,
all
yeah,
of it.
that's
Right.
true. We should have known.
Right.
I didn't see it coming.
Yeah. So I think for me, I came to it kind of late, and I think maybe season 5 was the first season I watched like live on air. And so I kind of somewhat quickly made my way through seasons 1 through 4. And I feel like it wasn't until maybe mid-season 2 or 3, basically, I think around the time that like Jamie and Brienne kind of go off on their like tangent. I think that's when I went from like, I'm enjoying this to like, oh, there's something special here. I'm really connected to these characters and love with everything that's happening and how it's subverting what I thought, these characters were and all that stuff. So it took me a while longer to get into it, but once I did it, it definitely had me. So the show is over now.
Yep.
There's this like that pause and that almost resignation in your voice.
It feels like you're saying the war is over.
That is 8 years of suffering in one sentence.
Yeah, and so there have been so many kind of postmortems about, what happened with the show, and it seems like the general consensus is around the time that they stopped, having the source material of the books to work on, the quality fell off, and the last 2 seasons especially kind of felt like a race to the finish that maybe isn't the wrong finish line, but was gotten to too quickly. Does that seem like a reasonable summary of people's reactions?
Yeah, I'd say so.
The consensus.
Yeah. I was kind of left at the end of this series wondering, like, is there a way to end a show like this well? And I think I try to look at it as not just from, in a perfect world where you could write whatever and it could be as exactly as long as you wanted it to be, then I think the answer becomes a lot easier. But in this situation that we're in, where there are market forces and people get worn out after doing the same thing for years and years of their lives, do you guys think it's physically possible in our reality to have a show like Game of Thrones and end it in a way that is like objectively satisfying?
Well, I don't know about objectively, but I feel like you can end a show with like the idea of we're going to end this in 13 episodes, or you can end it knowing where it's going to end up, but you can't do both at the same time. If you have an endpoint and you have a specific amount of time to get there, then it's going to screw up all of your subplots and you're going to have to rush things. And that's basically what happened with this, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious, AltShiftTech, since you have such a deep knowledge of like the books, do you feel like the way the books are going to end will be better? Do you think that having the show end the way it did has kind of ruined it, or is it allowed there to be a freedom with how the books end? Kind of what's your general take on all of that?
I think it's really hard to make statements about how the books will end because they haven't ended yet. And I think the reason why they haven't ended yet is because George Martin is struggling to find an ending that works. If it was easy to make an ending to this series, we would have read it already. So I think George is grappling with the very problems that doomed the Game of Thrones show in a lot of ways. And it's really easy to like idolize the book ending as, it's going to be the panacea, it's going to be everything that the show was not. And that seems to me like the perfect way to set yourself up for disappointment. Because I think the story of people's reactions to Game of Thrones, I don't know about objective, but in terms of people's subjective experience of Game of Thrones was the most hyped thing ever. People's expectations were sky high. With the amount of popularity, with the theories, with the social media, like none of that had ever been as intense as it was. And I think because of people's ludicrous expectations, that's why the end felt so hard. I guess I'm saying that, tempered expectations are going to lead to a lot more satisfaction than what we saw with season 8 and perhaps with the next book.
I think the idolizing the book ending is might go the way of the release the Snyder cut type idea, where fans have kind of built up this idea of something, and they're never going to actually see it, right? So they can continue to imagine what it'll be like, and it only gets better when it's in your own mind like that.
Right.
So long as it doesn't exist, it's perfect.
Right.
Right. It's the platonic ideal of
Yeah.
the Game of Thrones ending.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So the smartest thing George Martin could do at this point is possibly to well, not to release the books. That might be the best way to secure his legacy at this point. It'll be the Half-Life 3 of books, and he can just ride off into the sunset, forever remembered as the author who could do no wrong.
And then Brandon Sanderson can come in and finish the thing for him.
Well, George said he's not going to allow anyone to do that. But, when there's enough money on the line, who knows what would really happen.
Yeah, so I think the idea of expectations is obviously a very key component to all of this. And that's something I found myself thinking about, as this last season was progressing, is like, do I as a viewer have a certain responsibility? Like, because it's really fun to get hyped about things and like love it so much, and that feeling is amazing. But like you said, that's setting yourself up for disappointment. And so I guess I'm curious if in this age where the hype machine is so intense and there's Twitter, and when you're watching it with millions of people that are all going to react immediately. Like, do we need to be smarter viewers? And is that even something that an audience can control about themselves?
I mean, I don't know if you can ask an audience to do that. Like a worldwide fan audience, how do you tell them, button up your excitement, be a stoic viewer of this and see it very objectively? I don't think it's ever going to be a reality. I think part of the problem with this final season of Game of Thrones for me is I was okay with it not being the story that I thought it was going to be. I'm open to that, and that's part of what I love about Game of Thrones is that it's usually not the story I think it's going to be. But as Sage, as you pointed out in your last Game of Thrones video so well, there were thematic threads and things that seem to be building up over the course of this show about these characters, about the world, about just where this is all going. And there was this weird, almost like severance from the previous seasons by the ending for me. And so I don't know if it's, it's a fan's responsibility to like accept that, like if there is real storytelling problems in that way, fans should expect that. And I don't think it's all our responsibility to like just be okay with that kind of a weird last second turn. That's my opinion.
I think that audiences really want to get hyped and they enjoy having those ridiculously raised expectations. But I think audiences also enjoy hating something. And I think audiences also enjoy piling on and having this cathartic outrage. And that's the story of social media, right? So I think that there's like these perverse incentives for people to build up unreasonable expectations and then to come crashing down onto a thing that they love. Something that people do to, celebrities and politicians. We raise them up and then we take them down. And that's just something that people love to do.
I'm totally guilty of that myself. I mean, I was basically like self-medicating on the Free Folk Reddit with like every single meme that was ever posted there. Yeah, something like reaches a critical mass at some point where it's like, okay, now we're all turning against this thing and it's a group think and it just goes on from there. But on the other hand, like, sometimes like that experience is like actually more enjoyable than an enjoyable story.
Because you have to think about an enjoyable story. Like it takes work to like understand something complicated. It's a lot easier to say, "Hey, isn't Euron Greyjoy an asshat?" And then you can all laugh together and it's a good time. Like it's not as much work to hate as to love.
Right. Like if Game of Thrones ended with a competent ending that was satisfying and we all just moved on with our lives, would that be as interesting as this? Like crazy catastrophe?
Maybe we wouldn't be having as interesting a podcast discussion.
Yeah.
I feel like what you just described was kind of my experience with Breaking Bad, actually, where I feel like Breaking Bad is kind of the example of how to end a story well. And it, I think, objectively does do a good job of like wrapping up the story. And I think partially why it's so successful is I feel like the real climax happens in the second to last episode, which is, I think, one of the best episodes of TV ever. But I remember watching the finale and kind of having this moment of like, oh, okay, and now we're done. Like I wasn't disappointed, but it was just like a kind of back to reality like release that, yeah, in some ways isn't as cathartic as like, well, wait, we have to talk about this now for weeks on social media and see where it goes and see the reaction videos and all the things.
I had the same thing with Endgame where as soon as that ended, 10 years of story investment, and the moment it was over, I was like, okay, I'm released. I I was like emotionally completely over it, and like the MCU in general.
Right.
So it's, but I mean, like, I can't say they did a bad job. They did a pretty good job.
Right.
But that's just kind of the nature of moving on from things.
I want to go back to something you said, Sage, where you were saying, to kind of satisfyingly wrap up a story, you can have an idea of where you're going or X number of episodes, but you can't have both, right? Sort of.
Mhm.
So, and that kind of ties into, there's this article that was being shared shortly after the episode ended that was kind of talking about Game of Thrones as a sociological form of storytelling and how it transitioned to psychological. And the interesting points of that argument, I think anyway, are the sort of sociological mode of storytelling is letting the characters react realistically to the forces of the world. And I think the first seasons of Game of Thrones do that really well. And that's why it's so compelling and feels so real. But sort of like you were saying, Sage, once it gets to, well, now they need to get here by this time, that kind of has to go out the window. And
right, they're no longer reacting to the world. It's just the characters are just moving pieces around the board until we can get to the end point.
Right.
And
fast traveling. Yeah, as Lindsay Ellis puts in her video.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's why it feels contrived. Like, a lot of what happened in season 8 felt like it happened for no reason other than to generate conflict. Whereas in past seasons, you had stuff like, the faith rising up, and you had riots by the common people, and you had like political issues rising up, which felt like real outside forces creating the impetus behind the story. But when you've got stuff like, Jon Snow boneheadedly deciding to reveal his parentage, that felt like an arbitrary and artificial way to cause conflict, as opposed to the natural, believable political forces that defined the earlier seasons.
Yeah, the last few episodes, it really feels like there's only 20 people in the entire world. You get no sense of like what the people think of Cersei blowing up the Sept, right? Like, why is everyone going along with this? And, why aren't there, Baratheon cousins that are like saying they should be on the throne, right? Like, there's a lot of little things that get lost there, which is also like, again, why George hasn't finished these books, because every time one thing happens, he goes, oh, there's like 18 consequences to this that I could explore, and then you end up with 10 chapters in Dorne. So,
Yeah, and so I think,
and I like the Dorne plotline, but
I like the Dorne plot.
We'll get to that.
the Dorne plotline in the books
In the
anyway.
books, okay.
Just to clarify before the commenters.
Maybe it's just that I like Dorne as a place. Like, if I were going to live in Game of Thrones,
I mean, it's literally
Dorne
Spain,
right?
Like, I've visited the Dorne location in Spain, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
Best sets on the show.
Yeah. Thinking about that, it seems almost so. I think what is so great about that kind of storytelling, that mode, is that it feels believable and you can buy into it, and you're with the characters because you understand their struggles and they're making choices that even if you don't agree with, you understand because they're simply reacting to what's happened. I feel like that is the most kind of it's a fun way to get into a story and really be invested because it feels so honest and real. And I guess what I wonder is that like necessarily in conflict with what we consider to be like a satisfying ending.
Right. Like, how do you end a sociological story? Because in theory, it should go on forever. There is no tidy ending.
See, I always thought that like the ending of Game of Thrones would be very much like Macbeth. And like the show is basically Macbeth, just over 80 hours. It's, you have the magic is very similar in Macbeth, where it's very malicious and there's a cost to it, a very heavy emphasis on prophecy. You got the political contest going on. And the thing that happens in Macbeth is that, the character, this is a spoiler for a 400-year-old play, but at the, English 101 here, at the end of Macbeth, Banquo, his son is out there somewhere. And there's the suggestion that the peace that is made at the end of the play is going to eventually be disrupted. And I always assumed that would kind of be the ending of Game of Thrones, where it really doesn't end. There's just this, it's not the grand, finale like on Lord of the Rings, where you feel like, oh, this is going to be 1,000 years or however long years of peace, right? On a Game of Thrones story, I feel like should have ended with like, there's like still 8 people out there that want to wreck what we just did. So
I was imagining the end of Hamlet, where some Norwegian bloke walks into a room full of corpses.
Well, it's interesting because
Well, isn't that what Euron Greyjoy does all the time? Is he Norwegian or Danish? He's Danish, isn't he?
Yeah, something northern. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
it's all those northern places.
Oh, in the books, there's they dress up as trees too. That's another Macbeth.
really?
Yeah, there's an Asha chapter where that happens. See, am I reading the books?
It's paying off.
This is finally I'm finally getting wringing some content from it.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, for me, as far as what we felt going into this final season, how we thought it would end, part of what I was expecting was a very down ending. I was okay with a down ending that was not Lord of the Rings, Aragorn becomes king. And I thought they were setting us up for that in the second episode when it's like, goodbye to all the characters. Like, this is it for them. And I was like, okay, great. I'm ready for this. Like, most of them are going to die next episode. It's going to be a whole different ball game. It's going to be, this war is basically over. It doesn't matter anymore. What does that mean with Cersei? What does that mean with whoever survives Winterfell? It was just interesting to see how, like, I was okay with them really taking it down non-traditional avenues. And then the avenue they chose just felt so off. I don't know. It was just, I guess I'm just playing kind of like the disgruntled fan in this conversation, but I felt like there were so many ways to quote unquote subvert expectations that would have felt more sociological, or it came out of the rules of the world, or the expectations we had of how dangerous this world is and how you will die if a wave of zombies crashes upon you. So I'm just so confused by their choices. I still don't quite understand it.
Yeah.
I think what you said is very true about, like, it's pretty easy to end a soap opera, but it's a lot harder to end a historical, sociological sort of a story. And that's part of the point of the books. The books, like, you can see them as essentially an epilogue or a continuation to, like, the previous story, the fairy tale story of the young hero Robert Baratheon, who cast down the evil king, the Mad King Aerys, and married the beautiful woman, although, the wrong beautiful woman. And A Song of Ice and Fire is essentially saying that, well, that's the story, but guess what? It doesn't end there, because the young hero grows up to be a really shitty politician, and the beautiful woman becomes disgruntled with the sexist world that she lives in. And the daughter of the deposed Mad King wants to come back. So, like, the sort of the point of A Song of Ice and Fire is that true historical, sociological stories have no end. So I don't expect the ending of Game of Thrones in the books to have any kind of like a neat or happy conclusion. And the name of the final book is apparently going to be A Dream of Spring. And A Dream of Spring does not sound very conclusive, does it? It sounds like you're wistfully hoping for the future and or dreaming of the past, So I think it's... And George Martin has written all sorts of stories with ambiguous, strange, dark endings. So I think that's definitely what we should expect from the books. And unfortunately, the show perhaps didn't capture that as a result of not accounting for the more historical, sociological, political sides of the story. When Bran Stark becomes king and all of these, the Seven Kingdoms all bow to him for strange and poorly explained reasons, I think that's exactly the sort of thing that's going to be complicated more in the books.
Yeah, it's so weird to pick an avenue to critique the show and its decisions, because you can say, like, oh, they made the wrong decisions. Like, these story beats should not have happened. But then that's not quite true, right? Because, like, had these same moments happened in ways that were, they spent more time building up to them, like, like if you isolate, Daenerys burns down King Landing as like a story beat, like, that's not an inherently wrong choice. It's just
Right.
on what the execution of it is, right? But it's just like the way that they've done it. It's it's very painful to watch a lot of these episodes, and like, because of their rushing. And what I was trying to get into with my video was that they're going backwards on all of the themes that they were trying to do. You can go both, like, critique it on both ways by saying these are the wrong choices, and also, like, these were the right choices, just not the right way.
Well, I feel like, there's a term I heard recently called organic story structure, and how, you want it in a great screenplay, you've got great structure, you've got this kind of remarkable journey from at some point a character is 100% one way, and then by the end they're like 100% the other way. And somehow getting from point A to point B needs to feel entirely organic. It needs to feel like every choice they make makes perfect sense for who they are and what's happening to them and how their world's affecting them. And I think what happened in the last season of Game of Thrones was there was this predetermined structure, but there was zero organic, motivation to get us through that structure. And that's, the moment it broke for me, I was giving it so much benefit of the doubt as long as I possibly could. Even post Arya stabbing the Night King, I was like, maybe there's a reason for all this. And it was just that moment when they cut to Daenerys' face and she has an angry face, and then we never see her face again the entire rest of the episode. And she's just now a weapon of mass destruction, killing all the civilians first before she goes to attack Cersei. Like, just kill the civilians first.
I had such a visceral reaction.
I actually kind of felt sick. I felt sick. I was
for days, for a few days afterward. I was just lost. I was looking out the window in my apartment, what have they done? Oh no!
It made me feel sick. I really felt gross. This is such a betrayal for me of that character.
Well, and I think what you mentioned there about that we never see her face again, I feel like that was the real betrayal and kind of cop out for me.
Own it.
As a filmmaking style, we've been with her since the first episode, and now at this peak turning point, we're just not gonna get to see her anymore. And it feels like such a, she's the bad guy now, everybody, sorry, you don't get to understand it.
Right.
We can't make you understand it, so now she's
I feel like it's acknowledging that it doesn't make sense. Because what is her face doing while she methodically burns alive every citizen of the city?
That's a great question. It was half an hour, hours that Daenerys spent strafing the city systematically.
It's so systematic.
Was her face clenched in rage for a full hour watching civilians roast underneath her?
Right.
Seriously?
I'm sort of of two minds about it though, because if they were showing her face, then the show is on some level asking us to still empathize with her situation while she's doing that. And so on one level, I kind of like the idea of okay, now we're going to go street level and just see the impact of this. We've seen this whole backstory for this character, and here's what happens at the end of it. Not defending it, but it's
but I think you can have somebody turn villain. You can see Cersei's face while she does something horrific, and you don't empathize with her. You're kind of oh, you're so god awful. I really just think the reason they couldn't show her face is they really didn't understand how she could be doing that for, like you said, an hour straight.
I think Cersei,
they're making the choice for the wrong reasons. So.
I think Cersei's a really good point, because I think the point of Cersei's character is to give us someone awful and completely unforgivable who does these terrible things, everything from torturing a nun to killing a dog to blowing up a city full of the Pope, and then it humanizes her and helps us to understand her. Not everyone likes Cersei, not everyone identifies with Cersei, but I think that this story is about showing us how she got there and understanding how her circumstances and how her relationships made her the person who she is. And I think that we didn't get that with Daenerys Targaryen in season 8, and I think that's the problem with it. And what you said, Sage, about if they showed us Daenerys' face, it would have been suggesting that we should empathize with her, perhaps. But I think that's what art should do. It should challenge us to give us something confronting and ask us, well, how do you feel about this? Is there part of this in you? How do you? I think it would have been great if it drew us more into Daenerys' world, into her feelings in that moment, but it didn't. Because the next episode, the finale, Daenerys was completely impossible to relate to because she was Hitler. She was just giving this fascistic speech about taking over the world, and she offered no even remotely believable excuses for her war crime the previous episode.
She was the secret Hitler the whole time.
Well, it was fascinating how I think what else bothered me was that the only way you could read her speech in the final episode is that she literally is just crazy. She just now she's Mad Queen, because she's speaking in those terms of, we freed the people that we just burned alive in their entirety. So it just felt so disrespectful to that character, to just have her flip to, I'm just crazy, and that's the only reason now for what I'm saying and what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And to even just like the way she goes mad, like I really feel like it should have lined up with the Mad King's going mad, which isn't just like a flip a switch and he did all these crazy things. It's, he was spending years on the throne getting more paranoid. I mean, Professor X over here can tell me the details exactly, or a little clearer, but
that's our nickname for Alt Shift X, by the way.
Yeah.
Mega Man X.
Yeah. But like, it would have been, I really feel if I was doing a rewrite of this, like I really feel like, defeat the White Walkers early and then show us like a Daenerys's reign and like spend time in that, status quo, and have her slowly lose trust in her advisors, and then she resorts to something like this.
Right. I was okay with the twist of the White Walkers not being the end all be all.
Yeah.
Like when that happened, I actually was willing to accept that and was excited to see what happened next. And then, like you put in your video, Sage, it was just so rushed. The beats happened so fast. It was like,
well,
whiplash.
right. It's three different story arcs, sagas that are pushed into this one season. So, yeah.
So for me, the breaking point was the death of the White Walkers, and I feel like to kind of quickly go back to, the what we're talking about with the sociological storytelling, where maybe there isn't an end, maybe it stops at some point if you're being truly that way, because there's always going to be consequences. It's always going to keep going. I feel like the one element of Game of Thrones that doesn't fit into that is the White Walkers. Like winter is coming, and it will be here, and at some point that's going to decide things one way or another. So it also seems to me anyway that there is this kind of built-in point of resolution that will decide kind of the fate of the world one way or another in a really big way. And so that's something I'm curious about, how he will handle that in the books. But I think that's why that moment for me was the breaking point, when everything, I think that's what drew me in a lot, was this sort of the theme of we all need to put aside our dumb stuff. We don't care about this like throne. Like the important thing is winter is coming. We need to like solve it. And so when it was done just in this one episode very quickly with Arya stabbing him, first of all, I was upset because there was none of the Azor Ahai stuff, and I've watched too many Alt Shift X videos probably because I had like a really high expectations
and rewatched them.
Michael sat me down and he showed me so many Alt Shift X videos. He was like, "No, look at all the mythology in the books. He lays it all out. Azor Ahai."
I feel a little guilty for getting this many people excited for something that added up to nothing.
And so I want to talk about that also at some point in a good way. But yeah, I guess I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are with the White Walkers and how that was resolved, and is having an element like that in your story, again, contradictory to this kind of sociological ongoing storytelling?
I think that the purpose of the White Walkers and the purpose of the supernatural in lots of stories is to push your human characters to extremes to find out what they're made of. Like that's kind of what like fantasy, or a lot of fantasy, is for. I think like the reason we have goblins and monsters and dragons is not to explore the condition of being a dragon or what it's like to be a goblin.
Yeah.
The point is to explore what is it like to be a human when you're facing something extraordinary like a dragon. So I think that's why the context of things I think will be very different in season 8. For instance, I think that Jon Snow probably will kill Daenerys Targaryen, but I think he'll do that in the context of the White Walkers. And, we'll understand why Jon does something so extreme because he's facing something extreme. He's facing a world-ending supernatural threat. And yeah, not to mention all of the Azor Ahai nonsense that supports the idea of, sacrifice and Nissa and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think that's what the White Walkers are about.
Yeah. And it was sad when they just got stabbed away.
Yeah, well, I feel like too that they are partially still with like part of the sociological storytelling in that it is like a climate change metaphor to a large extent. So like we're seeing how these different political factions are reacting to something like that. But like on the other hand, I've always just wanted Game of Thrones to like not have that, just because I felt like in the lead up to it, we just lost a lot of the ambiguity in the show. A lot of the gray characters just are forced to be, either good or bad, which is what you're saying, that something like this is going to force characters into certain camps.
R.I.P. Varys.
Yeah. R.I.P. Littlefinger.
R.I.P. Cersei.
Yeah.
I feel like her, yeah. I wanted her death to be so much better.
She just
R.I.P.,
didn't do anything.
She didn't do
anything all season.
R.I.P. Tyrion's cleverness.
I think that was one of the most sinful things of the final season.
Yeah.
Just underutilizing Cersei.
But sorry.
Hey, Lena got to cash a check, right?
I think somebody wrote, there was like a headline that was like, she got paid $2 million per episode to stand on a balcony. Like, good for you, girl. Yeah.
That was the joke I was stealing.
Yeah.
It's a big hint that Cersei dies like early-ish in the next book, because the showrunners clearly had no like Cersei moments to use in the final season. I think she's long gone by that point in the books.
Interesting. Alt Shift X is this extremely popular YouTube channel about all these Game of Thrones theories, and I feel like as someone that like got super into it, it really enhanced my experience of the show for the like pretty much the whole time. And I feel like it was required viewing, and now I will not go back and rewatch season 8 probably, but I might at some point go and rewatch your recap videos.
I feel very differently about them. Like the recap videos became like therapy for me.
Right.
Yeah. No, it really was helpful during the season to have those Alt Shift X videos to just kind of go to and like sort things out and just feel through it.
Yeah. So yeah, they're incredible, as you know.
Thank you so much.
And so I kind of want to talk about, since again we've all made videos about Game of Thrones, how do you guys approach talking about Game of Thrones? Because I think what I like about your whole channel, AltShiftX, and Sage, all of your videos, is that there is a measured sophistication and some objectivity brought to it. Even when being critical, it feels like it's constructively critical, at least. So yeah, how do you go about making videos about something as huge as this, which people have such strong opinions about?
I made Alt Shift X as a reaction to everything that I hated about other YouTube videos. I was really tired of people who were just overly opinionated, just mouthing off in an uninformed way about whatever they found annoying. I was frustrated with YouTube videos that have 2 minutes of introduction and nonsense before they get into the content. And so I just made the opposite. I made something that was, dry and very text-based and very academic, and something that, the content starts 1 second into the video. I try to let viewers make up their own minds. It's not my job to tell you what to think. It's my job to give you the context from the books and from the story and what happened in previous episodes and what might happen in the next episode, so people can take from it what they will. So in that way, I try to make it accessible. You don't have to be part of a certain camp. You don't have to be on the hate train or the love train in order to enjoy Alt Shift X, I hope. It's a very sort of, academic approach, I guess.
Yeah, which I really, really appreciate. Yeah, and Sage, what about your approach?
Yeah, I feel like when you're doing a negative review and there's a lot of other negative reviews for something that's so big as this, and if you have a bit of a platform that, it's kind of on you to be a little more measured in the ways that you deal with it. Or at least I felt like that's what I didn't want to, I wanted to critique Game of Thrones, but I didn't want to be adding to the fires on the internet that are, I didn't want to just pile on. Like, I wanted to come at it with a bit more of a measured approach. A lot of it just comes down to tone. Some of it is just on what some of the editing choices that I decided to make in the videos. And this is something that I would not have thought when I started YouTube, because the videos I started YouTube with are very, very different from where I'm at now, and much more negative and a little bit toxic too. When Game of Thrones season 8 was airing, there was all these interviews that are hilarious, of all the cast members kind of not digging the season.
Those super cuts. Yeah.
Best season ever.
Yeah. That's the class. That's like that's the clip.
Right. Those things are all tons of fun. But I felt like if I put them in my video would be like more entertaining, but I wouldn't like it as much because I feel like I learned this lesson watching how people reacted to The Last Jedi. There's a lot of reviews in that about that movie that use interview clips of Mark Hamill, or him being on a red carpet and looking a little out of it and using that as if it is evidence. And it's not. It isn't evidence. It's a fallacy. It's a appeal to authority, right? Just because one actor didn't like the thing that they worked on doesn't mean that thing is actually bad. I mean, the actor who played Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars did not think much of those movies. That doesn't mean those are bad movies. I made the decision to not use those clips, even though you do better on YouTube if you can tell jokes, and putting those things in, they're jokes, they work. But it just contributes to a culture of, I don't know if I can use this word on this channel, but shit posting, Yeah. So, and it's not good for fan culture, which is already, has a lot of issues with how viscerally it reacts to things and the ways it takes things perhaps too seriously. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly where I want to go with it, is like fan culture and the state of it at this point. And I feel like I think I, from my mother, get a sort of like devil's advocate reaction to anything, where as soon as too many people are saying one thing, I will defend the other side just to kind of create a balance. So I feel like I was really over season 8 early on, and then the more people that got upset about it, I was like, well, but if you consider this and blah, 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 the finale of this episode and da-da-da-da. But I feel like that comes from, just looking at fan culture as it is right now. And I think this is true of the video game culture also. There's a lot of entitlement and ownership that the fans feel over this content. And that is awesome on one hand, but it can be very dangerous and toxic on the other hand. And so it's something that I think about a lot and trying to figure out how to navigate it. I think is important for people like us that have channels that, we are influencers. I don't like to say that word.
You just call these guys influencers and yourself an influencer.
I don't. I'm sorry.
What do you
don't like it.
I mean, it's true, but I hate that word too.
But I feel like, it does. I feel like.
What are you doing at work today? Oh, I'm off to influence people.
Guys, remember to go to audible.com/AltShiftX for the free trial, please.
No, /screenplay.
/screenplay.
/ just right?
Yeah.
But
it's a WRITE.
Or text ASX to 500 500.
Yeah. That's great. But I really though, I think that's why I like both of your channels and your approach, because I think you guys do feel a certain responsibility to add to the conversation in a productive way.
They're influencing in the right way.
Right.
I think it's important not to pay too much attention to the toxic stuff, because it is just 0.01% of the loudest, worst people who are making that noise. It's not representative of anyone, and it's only meaningful to the extent that we pay attention to it. So,
well, the part that I pay attention to, is with going back to The Last Jedi and how, fans harassed Kelly Marie Tran after that movie, and I just don't want headlines to be oh, Amelia Clark gets death threats because, or even, DB Weiss and David Benioff, who people are more upset with than they are with Amelia Clark, right? Don't do those things, please. But you're right. It is the 0.01%, but they can be empowered and they buy internet content and creators. And I think it's a pretty direct.
Yeah. Well, because, YouTube is all about attention, and those are the things that get attention. I feel like it's easy to fall into that system and just, propagate it more and more.
Don't give the trolls memes. Don't give them ammunition.
Yeah.
But then we won't have any memes. What am I going to do? Yeah.
And so another part of this kind of the online community of fans, how it plays into, the creation of these shows is that I think clearly, creators are also on Reddit, and George R. R. Martin has a couple quotes about if you are writing a story and then someone has figured out your ending and just wrote a blog post about it, it can be very deflating, and you can either change your ending to try to keep surprising people or just go with it. And I think that's an interesting conundrum that creators have that didn't exist before pretty recently, like that we have these huge subreddits and channels like AltShiftX that have broken down like these are like possible satisfying endings, and we can dive into all of that, and that is fun. What do you guys think the creator's role should be in that? Like, do you think they should be reacting? Should they be trying to avoid it? Is it even possible?
Well, I'm going to defer to Shifty on that one because I know he has things to say, and I'm sure Westworld will come into the discussion.
Yeah, Westworld was sure something, wasn't it? So as I understand,
I feel like
I've
just given you nightmares. Like this is like a post-traumatic event for you.
I've been trying so hard to forget, guys. So hard. So Christopher Nolan, that's him, isn't it? He has described writing Westworld Season 2 for Reddit. His intended audience is Reddit, and I can't think of a more loathsome task than to write a story for Reddit. And he said how he was on the Westworld subreddit, and he read people on Reddit correctly guessing future events in the series, and as a result he changed episodes like midway through the season, and he reacted to them, and he concocted this ARG where people had to like investigate images and work with these Facebook chat bots in order to get codes and hints, and most people have no idea that any of that was going on. And I think that's a lesson in why it's a really bad idea to devote 50% of your effort to 0.01% of the audience. It's not a good use of resources. And when your intended audience is the most smart and deranged people on the internet, the story that you end up with is too convoluted for the average person to get into. So I think they hamstrung Westworld Season 2 and made it a lot harder for a mainstream audience to get into. And they also made it just a worse story generally because they weren't trying to tell something that had characters behaving in believable, compelling ways. They had everything in the service of a mad puzzle box with no satisfying answers.
It's funny too, because when I think of Westworld, I can remember the twists in season 1, like right off the top of my head. But like season 2, I have to like, what?
Yeah, what even happened in season 2?
Even happened?
I remember
tough.
the valley, and they jumped into the valley.
Oh, right.
I guess we shouldn't get too far, just in case there's people who...
Jonathan Nolan, right? That's what you meant
Jonathan Nolan.
Yeah,
one of the Nolans.
Yeah.
The other Nolan.
It's like the Hemsworths. I can't keep track of them.
Right. Yeah.
There's one on Westworld.
Oh, there is, isn't there?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's right.
Surprise Hemsworth.
Surprise
always
Hemsworth.
surprises me. Yeah, I think it is just an interesting place that we find ourselves as storytellers, that is a thing that can and will happen. Like sort of like success is this double-edged sword where the more people that are excited about it, the more you're going to have people analyzing every single thing, finding things that maybe you didn't even intend to be there, but now people have like latched on to that. And so now do you have to do something with that? Or
Right. Like if you don't pay off that thing you had no intention of paying off, is that a disappointment now? Yeah.
I really think the problem is that people who spend a lot of time on the internet forget that there are people who don't spend a lot of time on the internet.
Right.
You get nerds writing stories for nerds, but like most people aren't that invested. Most people don't watch a TV show and then spend hours looking up fan theories and videos. They just want a satisfying story, and you can't neglect those people.
That's probably most of the people.
It is the overwhelming majority of
you
people.
Should probably just stick with writing your story for those people.
Don't write for your nerdy cousin, write for your mom.
Well, that's funny because my mom, let's talk about
Sage's mom. How is she?
Well, like she hates all fantasy. Like not hates, but just like would never ever watch anything fantasy until Game of Thrones. Like Game of Thrones was like... This is like a huge deal. But yeah, it didn't work for her. This is anecdotal, so it's not really representative.
It's a
but
podcast.
like there's plenty of people who like binged Game of Thrones leading up to this where like they're totally satisfied.
Interesting.
Plenty of people who or casually watching it who are satisfied. It's really like, once you reach a certain level of fandom that you have that investment in it, that this is not going to work for you.
My dad was satisfied. He was traveling when the final episodes were coming out, and he was like in France, so like he couldn't get, like, the HBO wasn't working there or whatever. And he came back, and the kind of storm had passed, and I texted my parents saying like, lower your expectations, not going to be the greatest episodes. And he was like, "Oh, I loved it. Everybody ended up where I wanted them to. Sansa's queen in the north, and that's all great." And he was very pleased and fine with it all. So it was interesting to hear that perspective of somebody who hasn't thought about it at all between episodes.
At a certain point, you just have to accept that this is not for us.
Yeah, right. It's for it started being just to get the widest possible audience.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Going back to the idea of subverting expectations, though, like I feel like subverting expectations is like a worthwhile storytelling goal if it's like a commentary on some kind of existing formula that's out there that's recognizable immediately.
Right.
There's 100 of those in Game of Thrones that you can recognize. But what season 8 was really more interested in wasn't really subverting expectations, even though that phrase gets thrown around a lot. It was really just surprising people. And I think like mere surprise is not nearly as interesting a storytelling goal, and like should always be like you should go things need to be satisfying as well. And subverted expectations can be very satisfying. Surprise isn't as worthwhile a storytelling goal. It creates a lot of shocking moments for the show, and I think the creators learn the wrong lessons there, where it's like, oh, this gets us buzz, this gets us more viewers, this gets us everything. A storyteller it's very easy to get distracted when you're telling a story, and I think that's often the case with the biggest movie franchises or TV shows that are famously known for not ending in a satisfying way or going astray. I feel it's because the storytellers are getting distracted by the spectacle or the buzz of it. There's something that's taking them away from what the core of the story should always be, which is on characters and theme. Telling a story that progresses in a logical manner.
And I think something that can also happen when writing a TV show is that there are factors outside of your control as the creator. Like you maybe introduce a character that people fall in love with, and then it kind of feels like, well, you can't have them become a bad person. Like whatever Tyrion's plotline could have been or would have been, everyone loves him too much. And if you do something wrong, I feel like that'll create a backlash that, I'm sure at least HBO wouldn't have wanted.
Michael, that Bronn plotline in season 8 was essential.
He had to survive the season 7 battle because you just had to have that. You had to have him there making jokes at the end.
Critically important character.
Yeah.
So painful.
But he's the only other character in King's Landing, right? So
who else has Cersei got to talk to?
Yeah. And another thought I had when you were talking, Alex, about your parents watching it and they enjoyed it, and people that didn't have this kind of long time to simmer with the show, being more into it. A thought I had was, I wonder if people's reactions would have been different if they'd released all 8 episodes at once. I think there's something about releasing it weekly, episodically, that can help build the hype, because everyone after every episode it's like, oh my god, can't believe we're talking about it all week, and it's building momentum and all this stuff. But I feel like this last season it all backfired, and just
right.
The more time people had to talk about it, the worse things got for it.
The buzz cuts both ways.
Yeah,
buzz is a two-sided blade.
Damn. If they released it all at once, we could have binged it and just ripped the Band-Aid off quickly. But the way season 8 came out slowly, that was a slow death, which is not always the best death.
Especially the second half of the season, post Long Night, just felt like a slow, kind of sad, Yeah.
Because very little was happening. Like there were like the key climactic moments of like the battle with the White Walkers, Daenerys burning King's Landing, and Jon killing Daenerys. And around that, there was an awful lot of just silent shots of Jon Snow looking sad, Tyrion looking troubled, Daenerys looking mad. There's so little dialogue and there's so little action, which, you know, maybe they want to give a contemplative tone, but you need to give us something to contemplate. And I think maybe that's what they failed to do.
She's my queen.
Yeah.
I don't want it.
Yeah. It's just, I do
That's pretty
wonder
good. That was like my first try at a Jon Snow.
Yeah, it was really good.
Oh, John, you beautiful idiot. That's just another thing that I'll be curious to see in future shows, like how time plays a role in, you know, whether it's released all at once, having that week between episodes, how that affects things, but also just having a series that's been going for 8 years. Like the culture and the world that the series starts in is not the one that it ends with. And I feel like there were problems and adjustments that had to be made because of the shift in culture that, you know, are warranted, and I understand, but I think also just twists. I just feel like I think it's worth giving at least a little bit to D&D, saying there are a lot of other forces that affect the process of creating a TV show that you can't control.
Right. I mean, they were trying to do like the most difficult thing to do.
Right.
Like,
Their task is impossible. I mean, it was an impossible task to begin with.
To do it on the fly, right? After running out of book material, you know, comes down to, you know, they didn't want to do more episodes, and I think that's what killed them in the end. But like, you know, also, how long do you want to be adapting someone else's work? You know, eventually you want to go on and make an impact somewhere else. So.
You know, I bet there's a lot of other people who would have been more than happy to step in if D&D wanted to step out.
Right. Well, I think you point that out in your video, right?
Yeah,
they could have
really
given me a call at any time. I would have been there.
Yes.
Got on the first plane.
Yeah. No, they should have had you out as a consultant.
I feel like you're like the Bran of like that universe.
I hope I'm a little more charismatic.
Yes.
A lot more personality for sure.
But like, if there's gonna be like an heir to the throne to take it over, like, you know,
I'm
maybe
better at
Bran is the
basketball.
right choice.
I like it. I kind of think of it as the Dark Knight Rises effect. That's kind of the first example I encountered, where Christopher Nolan made The Dark Knight, which just immediately became one of the best movies of all time. It's this impossible lightning in a bottle. You could never do it twice. You could never do it on purpose. Now go make a sequel. And it's just kind of like a doomed to fail kind of a thing.
I think a lot of it comes down to luck. Like, so many things have to just fall into place to get something like Game of Thrones right. And, you know, lightning struck like 4 times in a row with the first 4 seasons. And like, it's just a matter of time before the odds go against you. Like, I mean, there are many things that weren't luck that made Game of Thrones bad, but I'm sure, you know, fortune has something to do with it.
I will say, I love season 6. As a non-book reader, I read the first book, but I really love season 6.
I do too. I think I feel like that was in the sweet spot for me, where they had the momentum of the books and then got to do like cool TV stuff and blow stuff up and do cool battles.
Yeah. Everything that happens in season 6 is pretty, it's like implied to happen in the existing material. So there's like not that much. Yeah, it's just like a little bit of an extension from it. And then season 7 and 8, they're basically, you know, freestyling.
Yeah.
So
that's where the fast travel really kicks in.
Yeah.
I can't forgive what they did to my girl Arya.
What part?
Her in Bravos, like fighting the Terminator wave and like getting stabbed and falling into the canal water and then doing parkour the next episode. Like that.
That's right.
That was rough, man.
But like, she cuts off the candle and it's like cool.
but then like
because she can fight in the dark. It was cool.
Because she was blind and then she wasn't.
In the books though, it's like not even that much better though, because like there's like a chapter where she just like runs into Sam. Okay. You know, it's like, you know what I mean? There's like it kind of, the Bravos chapters are tough. Bravos is a great setting in theory, but
I think George could be accused of too much setup. I tend to think that Arya's adventures in Bravos haven't really started yet in the books. George has said that he could write multiple novels and series just about Arya's adventures in Bravos, so I think he's having trouble narrowing in on the story he wants to tell, perhaps.
I feel like maybe the problem with Game of Thrones is that you have one guy basically attempting to create like an entire universe that's as big as like the Marvel universe, right? Like in the comics. And like he maybe needs like the format of book publishing does not support what he's trying to do. And like if he was just allowed to publish like tiny little books of Arya, like I think that he might have an easier chance with that.
He sort of did that, interestingly enough. Like, there were these sort of anthologies published, like there was Blood of the Dragon, which was just the Daenerys chapters of A Game of Thrones. And I believe that came out possibly before A Game of Thrones did. So there are actually like individual arcs that he's published. And he has published like individual like preview chapters from the upcoming next book.
Right.
And so like he does seem to be straining against like conventional publishing in certain ways. And of course, physically his books are so large that they cannot be bound without bursting, and that's why a lot of the books are published in two parts. Yeah. So both physically and metaphorically, he is struggling against the conventions of publishing.
No, he should go and become the world's most successful ebook author.
Yeah, man.
Why not?
Just publish Arya, the Bravos years.
Start a Patreon and just Game of Thrones. Writing is hard.
Game of Thrones.
Writing
it happened.
Yeah, that is a great little bow to put on this discussion.
Yeah. Cool. Well, why don't we really quick go around and talk about what we've been watching this week, things you would recommend that people go check out. Sage?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so I got two things. I'm watching a show called Fleabag by Phoebe Waller-Bridge.
Heard that is amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah, that show is phenomenal. It's a 30-minute comedy show, romantic comedy show that is like the vulgarest piece of television you'll watch and some of the best editing you'll see as well. And then the other show is, if you're feeling like you need something to fill in the Game of Thrones vacuum in your life, may I introduce you to South Korean reality television, which happens to be the subject of my last video. So this is a little bit of
shameless self-promotion.
Yeah. But if you watch my video, I'll spend 10 minutes explaining to you why this is such a great investment of your time. It's a show called The Genius. It's basically Game of Thrones, but with board games. Man, that's a great elevator pitch now that I said that off the top of my head. But yeah, so those.
Check out.
Curious about what you're talking about.
So go watch Sage's video and then go watch Genius.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Alex, what about you?
So I'm late to the party on this, but my good friend Dan always likes to show me episodes of Documentary Now when we hang out. It's on Netflix. It originally aired on IFC, but it's the show created by Fred Armisen and Bill Hader.
Oh my God.
And yeah, Michael, you haven't watched this?
No.
I think you'd love it.
That sounds amazing.
I think you'd really love it because it's such an interesting show. It's got such a specific sense of humor, which is, I think, once again, I think you'd love it, Michael, as a Portlandia fan.
Right.
It's basically very dedicated to nailing the actual aesthetic of real documentaries, but they just all star Bill Hader and Fred Armisen. And they just have this, and they just kind of go off the deep end basically by the end of the episode. But they're so dedicated to making it feel like you're watching PBS, and it's called Documentary Now, and that's what the show is called. And every episode is introduced by Helen Mirren, and she says, this is episode like 501 of Documentary Now, and this, we're going to retrospectively look back at this classic documentary. And they mock everything from chef's table style stuff to they have a great episode in the season 1 that's mocking Vice News. And they just nail it, and it's got that weird sense of humor where they're just playing it pretty earnestly most of the time, but it's just a little off. And it's Fred Armisen and Bill Hader, and they're just geniuses. So I highly recommend Documentary Now. It's on Netflix. May not be for everybody, but if you've got a weird Bill Hader, Fred Armisen sense of humor, you'll love it.
Awesome. Cool. Alt Shift X, what are you watching?
I've been getting into Dark belatedly. It seems like tailor-made to make videos about just because it's so ludicrously complicated and mysterious and interesting. So shameless self-promotion, there might be a video about that coming. I'd also add that,
Gotta do it. You gotta do it.
Fleabag really is amazing. I couldn't recommend that more.
It's only 12 episodes long too, so I feel like I'm like recommending that. It's a great show, but then afterwards you'll be like, oh, there's not enough of this.
Wait, in its entirety?
And there's 6 episodes in season 1, 6 episodes in season 2, and they were made 3 years apart. So the last season came out this year, which means probably not going to see any more episodes for a while. But yeah, those 12 episodes have some of the best sexual tension ever put to screen.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it is good. And I've also seen Childhood's End, which is a poor adaptation of the book, but it does have Charles Dance in a memorable costume. So I suggest you'll check that out.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Well, I've just been, like everyone else, making my way through Stranger Things season 3, and it's an interesting entry in the how do you continue a story maybe past where it needed to go, but I feel like they're doing a good job of keeping it interesting and relevant and developing the characters in a believable way that makes it fun to keep going. So I'm only halfway through. I'm gonna see how it ends, but it's impressive to me what they've been able to do with a show that I felt like really only needed the 1 season. But I'm enjoying that they've gone this far with it so far. Yeah. So Sage, AltShiftX, thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun. Where can people find you online? What are your socials?
Sure, yeah. So the channel is called Just Right, WRITE, because it's a pun. I am very. I'm just the world's most clever man. And my Twitter handle is Sage Hayden, and that's it. That's it.
And you have a great video about puns also. So
thank you. Thank you. That's like my favorite one.
Yeah.
It's just me punning for 5 minutes straight.
I got to watch that.
Yeah. AltShiftX, where can people find you?
On YouTube, you can find AltShiftX, ALT Shift X, and
you can also find AltShift ZZZ and AltSwiftX.
We don't talk about that guy.
Yeah. That's somebody else.
Oh, that's a different.
Yeah, I don't know him. But yeah, no, thanks so much for having me, Michael.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Be sure to share the podcast, subscribe if you haven't, leave us a review on iTunes, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Cheers.